Today I wanted to kind of talk to you guys about a personal story. Unfortunately, my family was deeply affected by the Shoah on every side. We have Hungary, we've got Poland, we had the time Czechoslovakia and Germany. My father's side lost 60 immediate family members, so like completely devastated. On my mother's side, we also had as well. Interesting fact about my father's side is that the 60 family members that were killed were all killed by what's called death by bullet. Death by bullet are 2 million Jews of the 6 million Jews who were killed in their towns by their townspeople who rounded them up, stripped them naked, made them dig a hole, and then took their stuff, and that was kind of the end of it. And I'm not sure those numbers are known, but it's 2 million out of the 6 million died that way. Today, I'm actually going to have a little bit of a different story. So this is one of courage, and when I was taking the elevator upstairs, it said Yom Hashoah, Zecher, Hashoah, V'Gvura. And that's the word that we're going to be doing today, Gvura. Spoiler alert, it's my grandparents, so it worked out, and I'm born, so we'll get there. But I thought I would take you through just the most epic love story that I know of. This is a small fraction of the story. I have gone into schools for the last 3 years and told the story over. I've never repeated. I'm talking to the same children year after year. Have yet to repeat a story. So I picked out some of the highlights. Henry is my grandfather. Alice is my grandmother. Frey is her maiden name. We'll start just with the Frey family. So the Frey family were 5 siblings and 2 adults. This is the picture that explains them in their entirety. Like everything you see about this picture was the essence of who they were. You'll notice that the girls and guys are like smiling and you know, just their hands are on top of each other. Very respectable 2 parents sitting in the front, but she couldn't help but smile. She loved her children. She loved her life. And my grandmother's in the middle. My grandmother is in the middle for a very specific purpose. She was my grandfather's favorite. He said to everybody, "This is my favorite. I love her the most." Now it's kind of weird, right? You don't really get away with doing that kind of stuff these days. Grandma was born a perfectly healthy baby. By the time she hit 1, she had contracted a disease which burnt the nerves of her ears, inside of her ears, and she lost all hearing. At the age of 6, she was sent away to the only Jewish school for the deaf in Vienna, or in Czechoslovakia. She came home once a year for 1 week. Between the ages of 8 and 11, she didn't come home because one side or the other was in quarantine for some disease. So it's very easy to say this is my favorite. She doesn't live here. We never see her, but she's my favorite. And what he said to them was that you are all in charge of her. One day we will pass. She is a nechem. You will take care of her. So if there's going to be a family portrait, Grandma's going to be in the middle. I had a big debate if I was going to be calling her Alice or Grandma. I'm going to call her Grandma. She's going to be our Grandma today. This is a picture of Grandma at the age of 13. It's a very important picture because, first of all, she's super cute. But second of all, this is actually a very important age to the story of what happened. So Grandpa, this one, Grandpa also happened to be deaf. He was deaf also after birth by an accident by the age of 5. This is a picture of the Jewish Vienna Deaf School. I could figure out the year, but I don't know. It is a picture of students and alumni that all came together for a specific event. In this picture, Grandma's 15. You'll notice that Grandpa's sitting very close to Grandma and that he's already making his moves. This love story starts out a little creepy. We try to gloss over the creepiness, but I will mention it. In this picture, Grandma's 15, Grandpa's 25. We're just going to let that go. So at the age of 13, back when she was this little pigtail girl, she was at a prom party for the school, and the school had, you know, alumni come over. The alumni and the students were always together. And Grandpa was a little drunk. And he walked over to her, and she thought she was beautiful, and she's 13. And he says, "Hey, you know my name?" And she's like, No, creepy guy, do you know my name? And he's like, yes, you are the future Mrs. Greenbaum. To which she slapped him across the face and walked away. That's the beginning of their story. For the next, I think it was 10 years, for the next 10 years he pursued her. Not aggressively in the beginning, yes, she was 13. By the time she was 17, her father had arranged an engagement to a cousin, because that's what they used to do, also a little creepy back then. And he traveled from Germany, Grandpa traveled from Germany to Czechoslovakia to sit down with her father and say, you're making a mistake, it's a bad idea, break the engagement, I'm going to propose to her soon. Soon after, by the time she was 18, he was 28, he finally got her wooed, and she started to fall in love. When she was 23, he proposed to her for like the 100th time, but she accepted and she was smitten. She loved him so much. He turned to her and said, now that we're getting married, I just need to say, it is really bad out there. I need you to go and go to your sister. So in this picture, many of the stories that you're not hearing is that the 5 siblings all survived. Harry walked to Israel from Poland, trains and Trembin, but basically walked to Israel. Shari married a Swiss guy and went to Switzerland. Erna married an English guy, went to England. It's easy to remember. Erna went to England. Shari went to Switzerland. That's how I remember. Shani moved to America, and he lived there. So as soon as the war started, Erna was able to get a permit for Alice to live with her, and Grandma went to go live with his sister, who was super, super, super frum, and she was not at all, and she lived by him. So Alice gets sent to England, and now she is there. And basically what the conversation was is, we're engaged, I'm going to wait, how long could this possibly take? And he'll come, I'll get back to him, he'll get to me, we'll figure it out. But the love was done. Like they were, that was it. Quite a few years pass. So the war starts. The day my grandfather got his star, so this is my grandfather's star, the day he got his star, he held it in his hand and he said, I will never wear this. They can't make me. Very soon after, he was a wealthy guy. He was an amazing businessman. And he had built from nothing a furrier, like fur coats. He had built a furrier factory. It was quite successful. He worked with all of the rich people of Germany in Berlin. So when the Germans confiscated his factory and handed him the star, pretty much all in the same couple of days, he took whatever money he had. He got diamonds. He cut a hole in the bottom of his shoe. He put all of his diamonds in the bottom of his shoe, took a little bit of money, got himself a fake identity, which said that he was an Italian Christian deaf man. Okay, so he was a Jewish German deaf man parading as an Italian Christian deaf man. And the war started. Henry never gave up. He loved Germany. And even after everything was done, the country was his land. And he was going to stay in his city. He was a Berlinnik. He was going to stay there. He didn't care. So he started off with these fake papers. Now he knew all the rich people. They all knew him by sight. These were the aristocracy of the SS, right? He was actually also really good friends with the son of a Japanese admiral, which is really an interesting, friend to have in life. I'd love to have a friend who's the son of a. But so what he did was this man, was being paid a stipend in coffee beans because they wouldn't want to send over yen and how it was going to work. So he was given coffee beans, and he was stuck in Germany also. He couldn't get out. So my grandfather said, you know what? I know the rich people. I'll sell the coffee. We'll split the proceeds and this will work. And interestingly, the one thing the Germans loved more than hating the Jews was coffee. And they all knew he was Jewish. They all knew he was faking it, and they all wanted their coffee. So they kept him, and they never reported him. And this lasted about a year or two. After about a year or two, he was taken hostage. The Germans found him, pulled him. It happened to have been in the middle of the street. And they looked at him and they said, there's no way, it's been 2 years. You cannot be here. We don't believe you. You're Jewish. He said, no, my papers. Look at my papers. I'm an Italian Christian man. So they looked at the papers, and my daughter to this day is like, I don't understand the story. I don't understand. They looked at the papers, and they said, okay, we can't prove he's Italian, because he spoke a perfect Italian. We can't prove he's Christian or Jewish, so we'll prove whether or not he's deaf. So they all had this conversation, and he's standing there, and they're kind of yelling at him, and he's not really hearing what they're saying. And then all of a sudden, he sees everybody flinch. One of the officers went right behind him, took a gun, and shot it straight up in the air, right behind his back. Right? Any hearing person would not flinch at that moment. He didn't. He couldn't hear it. So they went, oh, sorry, so sorry. You are an Italian Christian deaf man. And this is why my daughter's like, I don't get it. Like, I'm like, no, Nava, let it go. Just, he survived. I'm going to give you tidbits. Again, these are just some of how he survived. My grandfather, I never met my grandfather. My grandfather died of emphysema 2 weeks after my parents got married. They made the wedding early so he would survive the wedding. But all my stories are through my grandmother and through my mother. But my grandmother took a lot of the things that he learned from the Shoah and would teach us. So, little known fact about me, if we're sitting in a conference room together, the chances are very high that I'm not putting my back to the door. Okay? This was like ingrained in me from my grandmother from like the youngest age. You sit so you could see the door. That way you could see who's coming in and you can get out. It's the same reason why I've got a little bit of cash and my passwords are always up to date, because you never know when you need to run. So he was a staunch believer. You never put your back to the door. But he also loved life. He loved Germany. He loved going out. He wasn't going to give it up. So he had another friend who was also deaf. And the two of them had decided to meet in a cafe in the middle of Berlin. Like, such chutzpah this guy had. So he's sitting in the cafe, and his friend had gotten there first. It's a table for two. His friend got there first, so obviously took the seat facing the door so that he could see. So my grandfather had no choice, and he had to put his back to the door. They're like schmoozing, having their little conversations, and suddenly he drops his hands. The guy that he's talking to, the guy drops his hands. He looks at my grandfather. He looks away. He looks at the door. He looks at my grandfather. He looks away. My grandfather stood up, kept his back to the door, walked out the back of the entrance. Here's a commotion. Here's the gunfire. Apparently what had happened was there were people during the Holocaust who, to survive, would rat out other Jews that were in hiding. And there was a woman who was with all of this SS aristocracy, and she walked in with like 3 SS guys. And she walked in and just started going 1, 2, 3, 4. Now she didn't see my grandfather, and he just walked out. And the one time he had his back to the door, I actually saved his life. After a few years of just living in plain sight, he finally had to run. And that was something that kind of had to happen. So he hid in the forest for a few years, pillaging, eating whatever he could find, stealing whatever he could steal. This is a very common story that we hear. There's the Swedish church in Germany. The Swedish church in Germany held quite a few Jews inside of the church to protect them. He spent some months with them. There was also, and we have no idea more of the story than what I wrote on the board, but a woman hid him for some time. So, that's what we got. One of the different kinds of stories that we got from this actually was when it was all over, the Russians actually were the ones to mess him up. He survived 8 years in plain sight, in the forest, doing everything. It was over. The Russians came in and they stormed the city. And Grandpa came out of hiding almost that day or the next day. And they see him and they put him under arrest. And he says, I'm Jewish. And he actually had, I think he had his papers already, or at least he threw away his Italian Christian papers. He's like, I swear I'm Jewish. You got to protect me. And they said, no Jew could have survived the last 8 years in Berlin. You have to be an SS person in hiding. And they threw him in jail. And when they threw him in jail, the guard looked at him and said, "Nice shoes. I want them." Now, I don't know if you guys remember the whole beginning. All his diamonds are in those shoes. Hasn't taken them off in 8 years. He looks at the guy, he pleads, took his shoes. They then released him. I actually think there might have been a bris milah check. He got out of prison, but without the shoes. He hoped to the day he died that the guy never figured out that there was like an empty compartment there and there were like a couple of dollars in the shoe. But that was kind of a very short version of his life in hiding. And of course there's like a billion more stories because 8 years, come on. One last story I wanted to show a good picture of. There's more to the story, but one last of the years of in hiding. The Haas-Vaterland bar, and I probably killed that, in Berlin, 1941. It used to be that when you would show up, I don't know if you guys know when you go to an amusement park and like you're going down the thing and they take a picture of you and then you can buy it afterwards. So this used to be like the thing in like upscale restaurants and bars. You would walk in, a photographer would come and say, "Let me take your picture," and you would buy it when you left. The bar that he's in was a bar that was the Nazi, like the bar to go to for all the Nazis. The street that he was in was a street that Jews weren't allowed to walk on. So not only did he walk on the street and go in the bar, he sat at the bar, he bought a glass of wine, and he asked the guy to take a picture of him, and he bought it. Because, screw you. The funny thing about this is that there's a little bit of folklore around this picture. It was cropped and it was put into something else. We lost the original. But apparently, right on the top right, possibly, there's a plaque on the wall that says, "We don't serve Jews or dogs." Like, it was like that kind of a thing. And he sat under the plaque so that it would just, thumb it up at them a little bit more. Just in case you guys are interested, 2 interesting facts about this hotel and this bar. One is that it was actually owned by Jews, and the place that they all went to was actually owned by Jews. And you probably actually all know the hotel called the Kempinski's. It is a very famous hotel, but Michael Jackson leaned over the railing with his son. Yeah, right. That was nice. But it has a very interesting history, and I just really wanted to show the gvura and the kind of like screw you attitude that he like got him through this entire time. So 8 years was the time that they were separated. Over those 8 years, Grandpa was only able to send out 2 postcards, one at about the 3 or 4 year mark that just said, "I'm alive." She got the postcard, which was a miracle because the plane, it was a Red Cross plane that took the mail, and he had found a way to like sneak a piece of mail into it. The plane was shot down over some lake, I don't know where. And the pilot, knowing that his cargo was precious in a very different way than you would imagine, it was all the letters of people saying, "I'm still alive." He got shot down. As the story goes, he landed the plane into a lake so that, because he was on fire. So he landed himself, like crash landed himself into a lake, and the plane went down. He then went and tried to collect as much of the mail as he could, took it away, and then got it delivered. The letter, which I really wanted to show you guys, but I just couldn't get access to it because I only put this presentation yesterday, is just a postcard. So imagine it's like, a tweet. That's all you really got there. It was like water stained and charred simultaneously. It's just an amazing letter, so I'm sorry you guys can't see it. The second postcard, which I never saw it, I don't know where it exists or what happened to it, was a letter. So Grandpa mails Grandma a letter. It's been 8 years. He says, "I don't know if you've been waiting for me. I love you. I got a flight to England where I'll be staying for 1 week. If you will have me, we need to get married that week. Then I fly to America, and I could bring you, after I'm in America, I can bring you as my wife. I'll be at the house at 10 o'clock on this day." right? And he kind of just mails that letter. So at 10 o'clock, he knocks on the door, and he opens up. I'm just trying to see if I have more or less time to tell more stories. So my great uncle, Bela, opens the door just a crack. Remember, they're super Haredi, right? So he opens the door just a crack, and he puts his head out. He goes, Henrich? And he goes, yeah. He goes, okay, she waited for you. The wedding's in 3 days. Now, remember, this guy just, like, crossed the ends of the world, and he's literally standing outside the door, like he's not opening the door for him. He's like, the wedding's in 3 days. We're ready to go. There's a minhag that the Khatan and the Khala do not see each other the week before the wedding. So, you're going to be staying down the block. At that point, Tante Erna hits Uncle Bela in the stomach, pushes him out of the way, and went, no! I think we can let this one go, people. Opens the door, lets him in, and they got to spend 3 days together before the wedding. Grandpa was 40 kilo at his wedding. He was, he was, in the later pictures that you'll see in a minute, he was a larger man. He hadn't eaten. You've seen the pictures. So this is Grandma and Grandpa on their wedding day. And I included the quote that we all know in the family about this wedding day, which is, Grandma always said, my wedding was the saddest day of my life. It was the saddest day of her life, not because she got to marry this man, and not because he looked the way he did, but when Grandpa started walking down the aisle, they started to make the wedding. It was all prepared to be in the shul, a small little thing. Who really knew them, right? She had some friends. It had been 8 years. Very quickly, they recognized that they had to move the chuppah to the parking lot because thousands of people were showing up. Grandpa was the first survivor that we know of that got out of Berlin and came to London. He got to get out fast to get the girl. So he had come, and people had heard and swarmed, so they moved the chuppah outside, and everybody was standing in this parking lot. And they left like a little aisle for him to walk down, and as he's walking down the aisle, people would stop him, hold his arm, and say, is Moshe alive? Is David alive? Is so-and-so alive? And he had to turn to every single one. He was in hiding. He knew that 1-2 people that he knew were alive, and he didn't know if they were that Moshe or that. I don't know. I don't know. And by the time he got to the end, he was crying hysterically for all that had been lost. When Grandma started walking down the aisle, Grandma spent the last 8 years in England. They grabbed her, and they said, did he tell you if David is alive? Did he tell you if Chaim or Moshe or whoever is alive? And she got to the chuppah, and everybody is crying on all the death. And it was the moment for everyone to gather and to have that moment, but it was a wedding. And it was the saddest day of her life, and she will always say. So the truth is that I actually only saw this picture for the first time yesterday. My mother found it and made sure to get it to us. I'd never seen it. She just said, I don't want to ever think about that day again. I want to tell you a little bit about Grandpa after the war and what happened. This was just a really cool, dapper picture that I had, so that actually has nothing to do with Jewish identity, but come on, he looks awesome. So he also loved having his picture taken, which is kind of funny. So Grandpa. When Grandpa left the war, and he, moved to America eventually with Grandma, and they were sitting, he made the decision in his head that God had abandoned the world. That there is no way this could have happened with a God who cared. And God was there, he just didn't care. My mother always talks about being religious versus being observant. So being religious is having a connection with God, and being observant is doing mitzvot. And my mother always says that my grandfather was zero observance, but the most religious person she had ever met, because he spoke to God every day. He yelled at God every day. He cursed at God every day, but that connection was there. Every single day they spoke. So he had decided that since God had rejected the Jews and the world, that we should in turn reject him. And what he did was he sent my mother to a Jewish day school, because you can't reject what you don't know, right? And Apikoros, who's simply an Apikoros, is, he had not nice words for that apparently, but if you're educated and you know what's happening, then you could be the smartest and the best at going against Jews and telling them why they're so wrong to love God right now. He did love the Jewish people. He loved Germany, he loved the Jewish people. He never lost faith. He was ever the optimist. Because he loved the Jewish people so deeply, and even though we know that he was not observant and did not do anything, that he kept a kosher home. He made sure his home was able that any Jew at any point can always come into the house, and they could always be able to eat and be together. And that community was more important than anything else. Even he would do the silly thing of kashrut in order to allow other people who were so, bad word, be able to come and be in that house. The problem is that when my mother hit 12 or 13 years old, so I don't know if you remember the picture, the guy sitting all the way on the right, his name was Shani, he was the one that moved to America. They had moved to be like 2 doors down from them, and Shani and Limid, his wife, were like second parents to my mother. My mother is a hearing child to 2 deaf parents. Lots of stories there. So Shani helped raise, and she was in this Jewish day school, and she saw all of this stuff, and she became a Baal Tshuva, which created a huge fight. And to the day he died, he was angry at her. I loved her, but could not understand how stupid she could be to love God and to, feel that way. After the war was over, he returned back to Germany because he loved Germany. And Germany was his home. Berlin particularly was the place he was going to be. And knowing how much he rejected observance is very interesting. As soon as he had that star, that day he got that star, and the day that he got his fake papers, he walked into the forest, he took some of his things, and he buried them. Now there's a whole folklore that he buried this like enormous chest, and I don't think that's true. But he buried a couple of things, and after the war he went back. He dug them all up. And this is some of the articles that he retrieved from the forest. All had been in perfect condition, meaning they had been in the ground, I think, for 10 years at that point. This is his tefillin and his tefillin cover. His tzitzit, which are very, very similar to the tzitzit that my kids wear. And in the siddur, which was clearly so used before the war. I mean, you could just see the binding was falling apart. The change, the switch that he went through was extraordinary. So I'm going to end on the high note. We're at the last slide. When Grandma and Grandpa were sitting one day in their living room in New York City on the Heights, Washington Heights, she's like, 32. Well, let's go. And he's like, do we not have this conversation? No, I'm ending it. There's no more human race. We're not having children. I love you, you love me, that's enough. We don't need any more. And the next famous quote of Grandma was, I didn't wait 8 years for you not to have children. So that was a little spoiler. So this is my mother at her college graduation. She graduated, and you cannot, so proud. My mother, as much as he didn't want to have a child, and as much as she rejected him and chose observant lifestyle, was the apple of his eye. These stories are he's wrapped around my finger. She had him so wrapped. He loved her beyond words. And I wanted to show this photograph. First of all, I think we did the 90s well. So you guys can see the attire. But when I was 16, so this is me, when I was 16, we took a family trip. It was not my first time in Israel, it was my second time in Israel, but it was the first time that we had all come together. Little Shai here is 13, it was his bar mitzvah or right before. And of course Grandma was going to come. I didn't mention, but Grandma raised me with my parents. My mother and father worked full time. Great stories about this one, but she was there. I got out of school at 4 o'clock till my mom showed up at 6:30. It was just us and Grandma. So when we went on the family trip, it was super important that Grandma would come too. Also, she had a brother, Harry, who was living in Israel for some time. She wanted to see. But I wanted to show this picture because, as you can see behind us, is the Ir Atikah of Yerushalayim. And this was, I remember this day where she stood there and I did this, right? And the only thing I'm sad is, and I want to thank you all for, first of all, sitting through this, but it also spurred me. I've been speaking for years, as I said, But yesterday, my brother and I decided that we wanted to make like a living document of everything, and we kind of rushed and pulled it all together and put together this presentation. This is going to be a living presentation that we're going to be able to kind of keep working on. There are hidden slides that you guys haven't seen, of pictures of the bakery he grew up in and all this stuff. But our big plan is that this summer we're all getting together and we're going to move over these pictures, and there'll be pictures of the grandkids and how, you know, one strong man and woman can start building up on Israel, and it's just an amazing thing. I hope you guys can share the story. I think that for me, being able to tell the story of Grandma and Grandpa makes them live much longer. Grandpa died 45 years ago. Grandma died when I was born, so 15 years ago. They are with us every day. These stories should inspire gvura, should inspire strength. I think you can always walk away with something. Tell the story. We should never forget. Thank you.